So in La Havre, you're like next door to Oak Island.
Well, I can't answer that, Ken. That's on a need to know basis, I'm afraid.
The New Brunswick Archaeology Podcast, featuring your hosts, Gabe Reinick and Ken Holyoke.
Welcome back to the New Brunswick Archaeology Podcast. I am Gabe Reinick in Fredericton, New Brunswick, and I am joined, like I am just about every fortnight, by Ken Holyoke in Lethbridge, Alberta. How are you, Ken?
Very best, Gabe. Very best. We're experiencing the windiest week, actually, I think I've experienced since we moved to Lethbridge, and I actually we always start off and I'm talking about the weather, and one of the things I've recognized is that we've recorded all of these sections out of context with the episodes in which they're coming out, and so there's going to be an episode that comes out a fortnight after this one, in which I provide a weather report that will be grossly inaccurate. And in the second part episode of Pseudoarchaeology, I feel like we are confusing our listener by providing them with inaccurate weather reports.
Well, you know what causes that, Ken?
I don't.
Chemtrails.
Oh. Exactly. Yeah. But yes, the tumbleweeds have been blowing around here. But it's
the listener won't know this, but in fact, the first time I met Ken, he was still going by the nickname Tumbleweed. It was a little bit it's a little odd, but that's how it works. But no, the listener can't see this, but Ken is indoors and he is in a hoodie and a vest, and what's left of his hair is billowing in the wind. It's
exactly.
It's pretty charming.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's whistling right through here today.
That's right. So as we mentioned, we are the New Brunswick Archaeology Podcast, and we are sponsored by, as we are every fortnight, the Association of Professional Archaeologists of New Brunswick, who just had our first lecture of our lecture season.
That's right.
That's right, with Haley Monroe, which was great. Talking about archaeological conservation here in Fredericton. And we are also, Ken, I see over your shoulder a gigantic cardboard box, which I assume is filled with all that money that we just got from the Shirk Lethbridge collab. Would you care to tell the listener a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we've been awarded a University of Lethbridge Shirk Exchange grant, which is basically a knowledge mobilization grant aimed at supporting research and dissemination of research results. And ideally sort of communicating to the public about sort of the work that you're doing. And so the New Brunswick Archaeology Podcast is now proudly sponsored by the University of Lethbridge and the Shirk Exchange Program. So Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council.
Yes, and thank you very much, Shirk. Thank you very much, Lethbridge. And we could not be happier to have that money. It also means we're going to be doing some exciting things in the near future. So stay tuned, listener, for that, because we might you may only know us through the power of long format audio at this juncture, but it turns out you could possibly meet us in person at some point.
Yeah, and have a much longer evening than you would plan to have to go see a live show that we will probably need to temper our talkativeness.
It's true.
At least, yeah.
The other possibility is that they could. I thought when you're going to say that I don't know if it's a sneak preview, but we're planning to be at the CAAs.
Yeah.
Which is a recipe to have not just a long evening, but a long morning with us.
Exactly. So the Saskatoon has the benefit of having one of these lovely CP hotels in it.
Cool.
The Bessborough in downtown. It's right on the river, actually, the Delta Bessborough. I'm not sure where the conference is being hosted, but I feel like the lounge. Go ahead.
This is our thing now, isn't it? That hadn't we decided last time that we were going to try to have a drink in every CP hotel near a CAA?
Yeah, I mean, and they always make great cocktails. And so what I've discovered, though, is it seems like most of these CP hotels all have lovely lounges, but it seems like they all have a custom Manhattan for each lounge.
Oh my goodness, we should almost make this we had already made this a thing, but it should be Manhattans that we'll do. We should find some. Someone we want to chat with and do Manhattans at the CP Lounge, or we'll figure out something.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We might be able to get Gary Copeland on the program, because I think that he may get dragged there, whether he wants to be or not. So
Yeah, I mean, wait, with the CP Lounge, that stands for Copeland Lounge, doesn't it?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll encourage him to go regardless. So
That'd be great. Do we need a special mic that can capture a lower voice than we?
Well,
we have?
I don't know. I don't know if we need to turn the gain up or down. That's that's. But I think you could take both of our octaves and we still wouldn't be like as deep as Gary's voice. So.
No, it's true. He might have a voice that it would be like when you tried to play Indiana Jones on the xylophone, it just wouldn't pick it up. It's possible that it thinks he's below the typical human range, just like that xylophone was above, So the mic would hear it and it would think that, oh, that must just be the dishwasher breaking. And
yeah. Zoom selects out the background noise. So
it's brake noise on the box truck outside.
Exactly. Well, we might have a producer by then, so we might be able to manage that.
That'd be great if we had a producer, especially for you, since the producer's going to fix your workload somewhat on this, right?
I think it'll be like I do enjoy going back through the episodes and hearing them. I get a pretty good chuckle, but the editing time takes a decent amount of time. That's And I will say, it's a free program, but Clipchamp is not really what I would call a user-friendly program.
Although we would like to thank them for their commitment to this show.
For their endless support. So
So Ken, this is my favorite Canadian phrase. We've ragged the puck a bit here on the intro, but as I was saying, we're still the New Brunswick Archaeology podcast, and that means that we are still. That's right, listeners, still looking for a new name for this podcast, one that just captures the kind of pizzazz, the electricity, the excitement that we bring to you every fortnight. And so, Ken, if the listener had a name that they thought might be better than the New Brunswick Archaeology podcast, where would they send that name?
They would send it to New Brunswick Archaeology, all one word, New Brunswick Archaeology at gmail.com. Archaeology spelled ARCHAEOLOGY, New Brunswick Archaeology at gmail.com.
That's right. And is there anything in that mailbox tonight for us to share with the listener, Ken?
Tonight we do not have anything in there. No, we've got some Podcorn support. The sponsorship opportunities are endless from Podcorn. But listener, we are always looking for new mail. And we do still have a prize pack from Eco4. Right. The lucky listener who fills out their bingo card, you've got a vast catalog of New Brunswick Archaeology podcast episodes to go through to fill out your bingo card. I don't know if Wally would be kind enough to do a season 2 version, or if the program has changed enough that there'd be a season 2 edition. But
we should actually get Wally on to discuss this with us.
We should
do a live spot with Wally.
Yeah, that would be a good idea.
Yeah, no, we absolutely should. So Wally, email in. We'll read it live on air, whether or not you're willing, to come on the podcast or not. But we'd love to hear about Wally's season in Ontario as well.
Exactly.
But if they won, Ken, I understand that you have some exciting news for if they were to win.
Yeah. So can you take a deep breath in through your nose?
Wait, is that a trick question? Is it because of this cold that's going around? You're just trying to find out if I have whatever.
What are you smelling right now?
I'm smelling that little bit of Courvoisier that I just drank.
Well, I mean that is a nice one. But if you were in Studio 598 right now, you'd be wafting a bouquet of cloves, allspice, cinnamon, rich cider, and the finest large format Kentucky bourbon that Costco liquor has to offer.
Wait, Ken, are you drinking what I think you're drinking?
Yes, that's right. It's Remembrance Day is over. This is a Great Northern that I'm holding up, and we have officially entered the festive season through all of North America.
Mm-hmm.
And with the other Thanksgiving happening south of the border this weekend, we're all going to be ringing in our Friday by purchasing large format electronics for what is perceived to be a deal, and stampeding precarious workers in pursuit of in retail in the pursuit of the hottest toy of the season. And we at the New Brunswick Archaeology podcast would not want you, listener, to miss out on the fun. So if you, listener, can rename the New Brunswick Archaeology podcast, This week, our prize package has for you a Black Friday special of New Brunswick Archaeology podcast proportions. And so in this Black Friday special, we are talking about a Series 1 and Series 2 sticker, an 8-meter or 1,200 foot measuring tape, an authentic Alberta belt buckle, and 10-gallon hat. That's at least 55 liters of fun by my calculation. 24 strips of teriyaki seasoned bison jerky, a case of Brunswick mustard and dill sardines, a wheel of Oka cheese, a special edition New Brunswick Archaeology podcast trowel sharpened perfectly to serve that cheese with, a loaf of Gabe Reinick sourdough, and a 2-liter Coburn's non-alcoholic apple cider, along with my own custom mulling spices recipe.
Oh my goodness.
And the best part of this deal is this is not a Black Friday deal that's taking 10% off, 50% off, even 75% off. We are talking a 100% free to you listener. And all you need to do is rename this podcast and give us your intellectual property in perpetuity. And you will have this hottest Black Friday deal that we can offer this year on the New Brunswick Archaeology podcast.
Well, Ken, that is fantastic. And I think we should possibly just mention to the listener that there may be tax implications to this sweet deal they're about to get. And they should consult with their personal accountant. But other than that, I think that is incredible. It's swag on swag.
It's swag on swag. And you could use it to have a Friday in. You could host a party with this package.
Oh,
you could throw it in your backpack and just wander around the town. You also could get a torso-sized bottle of Kentucky bourbon from Costco, and serve up that 2 liters of apple cider in the way that I'm enjoying this evening.
Well, Ken, that is fantastic. And if the listener wants to be wearing a hat, swigging Costco whiskey, and otherwise having a great mulling spice time, where would they send that?
They would send it to newbrunswickarchaeology@gmail.com. That is New Brunswick Archaeology, all one word. Archaeology spelled ARCHAEOLOGY. newbrunswickarchaeology@gmail.com.
That's great, listener. Don't mull it over too long. Send it right in, and you might be winning that exciting prize. And so, Ken, speaking of a bit of a prize, you were saying that you mentioned the hottest toy of the season, but probably one of the hottest toys of the season is also Darryl Kelman, who we're about to have on here.
Yes, yeah.
Hottest boy of the season. I know what we call it.
As we shared after Darryl, I think we forgot to tell him to stay on the call.
He hung up real quick.
But we had kept him pretty late on, I think it was like a Tuesday night or something. But Darryl is a good friend of ours, a colleague, CRM
former
archaeologist,
AP&B board member.
Former AP&B board member, a business owner, works in CRM in Atlantic, Canada. His business, Kelman Heritage Consulting, is still active, but he is now the senior archaeologist with WSP, working in Nova Scotia. And we've known Darryl for a number of years through the APA&B, but also through just kind of meeting up and becoming friends at conferences, right? And for those of you that have had the great opportunity to hang out with Darryl, he's a ton of fun, and also just a really brilliant guy. And I think what you'll find in this interview is how incredibly complimentary everything that he says is to the conversation that we had with Stef just a few weeks ago, right? And how without really, I think we maybe didn't plan this as well as we should have, but through a lack of planning, we somehow hit the nail on having two sort of totally different perspectives, both of whom kind of basically came to the same conclusion with how we approach pseudoarchaeology, how you deal with it effectively, and how you talk to the public about this, right? And how people, and how I think both you and I actually sort of picked up on stuff that maybe we've both been doing wrong and kind of been we've been grumpier about these things and kind of the wrong way. And
one thing I'm always struck by Darryl, and I saw Stephanie too, is that they tend to see the best in people.
Yes.
Which is an instinct I would like to cultivate in myself. But they sort of have down, and their ability to say, well, no, that person's intentions are much better than they may first appear, is substantial.
Yeah, and I think that's fair, and I think it's too a recognition, like what we've been trying to do with this show is sort of bring archaeology to a wider audience, like a non-disciplinary audience, to people who are interested in history and maybe haven't had and archaeology and maybe haven't had a venue in which to engage that through. But one of the things that Darryl pointed out, and I think Stephanie did this too, is that you can actually do that on the job, day to day, with people, even when they bring up, ancient aliens or the curse of Oak Island or things like that, right? That is actually a foot in the door to start a conversation about what it is we really do. And I think the listener will find one of the most I think that Darryl kind of drew this out and in a really effective way, that he said, he's been doing archaeology in the Maritimes for over 15 years. And he said it wasn't until about 7 or 8 years ago that he started getting questions about the type of archaeology we're doing, and not questions about how many bones and how much gold did you find.
Right.
And that people now know what an archaeologist is because of these programs, even if the programs themselves don't have the kind of messaging that we would hope that they would have.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think one of the things that Darryl really brings to this is that so he's in cultural resource management, but he's really used his position in cultural resource management to be involved in all sorts of public-facing aspects of the discipline.
Yeah.
Through the Nova Scotia Arch Society, his time with the APANB, and also just that he's an engaging fellow, which I think is too is good. Yeah. When Ken and I realized we absolutely had to have him on, actually, we were at the I can't remember if the party had actually started, but we were having that sort of hotel party for Dave Blackman and Smith Wittenberg.
Yeah, and Membertou.
And Darryl just recounted completely monotone and dryly and a sort of a parody of Oak Island that had us cry laughing. And we thought, well, perhaps that's the ticket. So
yeah. And just about got us there again in the interview. I think it was pretty close. So But so if the listener hadn't picked up, today's episode, I think we previewed this on the episode with Stephanie, but it was like 3 years ago that we recorded that. So
now we're one toke over the line, sweet Jesus, right? I think, is that the
one oak over the line?
Oh shit. No, I kid, listener.
I'm gonna have to bleep that.
Oh. Yeah, you are. Sorry. I even planned that ahead. I was setting that up, and then I forgot that you're gonna have to edit that. Yeah. Okay. Whoops. Sorry about that. Wait.
I'm just gonna leave this in.
Okay. So we won't rewind it. Yeah. That's too bad. I set that joke up, and I forgot that you're gonna have to edit it. Oh well.
So we are talking about so we're continuing our 2-part series on pseudoarchaeology, which may become one of these what's the gentleman, the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy? Why can't I think of the author's name?
Adams,
yeah. It'll be a trilogy in 3 parts, or a trilogy in 5 parts kind of thing.
Exactly.
So it'll be a 2-episode a 2-part episode in 4 or 5 parts over the course of the season.
Yeah, in which the weather is constantly changing.
Exactly. And seems out of step with what you're seeing outside. But we're talking in particular about the Curse of Oak Island show, and so the listener may be familiar with it. It's a program that runs on History Channel. I believe it is in its 9th season.
I don't know, Ken. The listener will learn that you and I haven't really watched this. I crammed for it by listening to hours and hours of podcasts on a long drive about it.
Yeah,
have you seen it?
I watched the first season, I think. At least the first season. I don't know if I got into the second season, but it was one of these things that I think was sort of a guilty pleasure at first, and then it kind of just
then it was just guilty.
Then it was just guilty. Exactly. And so we don't delve too deeply on it, but one of the things I thought would be kind of a fun way to before we segue into our interview with Darryl is to talk about so Oak Island is fairly famous myth, and we kind of talk about where the background of it came from, but like I think the listener and actually email in or make a comment on Instagram when this episode comes out or something like that. Some of the tales you may have heard about sort of archaeology or these myths that come up in the Maritimes. And so do you have any from Maine in particular, or ones that you've picked up on in your career in the Maritimes?
I mean, I just think it's the obsession with Vikings.
Okay, yeah.
Like kind of writ large. I think enthusiasm for Vikings would have to be mine. And I think the Viking thing is particularly, it reminds me of, and so I should just say that also some of the absolute nicest people I know are into the Viking thing. But go ahead.
And is this in the sense that like it's not just Lanso Meadows, it's that they were everywhere? Like the Norse penny thing, I'm guessing.
Oh yeah. Well, it's or just this idea. I mean, this is the Norse runestone, right? That's at the Yarmouth Museum.
I don't know if I know that one.
Oh yeah, it's a hoax.
Yeah.
And I think this. I mean, I think probably if you scraped really deep on it, it probably taps into something sinister. But I think at the most superficial level, the Norse thing is, and I think you remember Dave Black telling us this, was that it would be as if a couple guys from Cahokia decided to go on a fishing trip to the Miramichi, and they dropped a penny, and we decided to devote about half of Canada's archaeological interest to tracking down the exact route of their fishing trip. and that has always struck me as being essentially the attitude towards Norse. But what's your favorite? Well, I mean, but I also I've got a lot of time for the insane Chinese road. Remember this thing in Nova Scotia? It's hard to believe it's the exact width of the narrow gauge railroad. It must be some sort of magical ratio.
So when I was working with Stantec, I actually didn't take the call, and maybe we should have interviewed Janice, friend of the show, Janice, a colleague of ours, who
Janice is far too bright to listen to us. She was she's had enough. Yeah.
Who took a call from a member of the public in northern New Brunswick. And part of the reason she took the call was that the gentleman was Francophone, and Janice was the only person in the archaeology group at that time who spoke fluent French. And so she kind of went back and forth and was jotting down sort of notes for us to kind of follow the conversation, and sort of ran it down for us afterwards. And this gentleman had been working on his property and had found an underground bunker of some kind on his property that he attributed to the Dauphin. So I'm guessing this is Louis. Is it Louis the 14th or 16th during the French Revolution? I should probably should have written that
All
down.
my Louis overlap at that point. But they had a bunker.
So my understanding is that the tale is that the during the French Revolution, prior to the nobility being sort of overrun, the Dauphin, so the son of the king, was sort of ushered out of the kingdom, and there's all these rumors about where he ended up. And one of them was apparently that he ended up in somewhere outside of Saint-Quentin in northern New Brunswick, in the safety of this bunker. And that my understanding was that alongside this was that he has descendants in the area that can trace their lineage to this expat royal. And so, I can't remember if there was a motivation here that it was sort of to reclaim the crown or anything, but it sounded like he had encountered maybe an old foundation wall. If there had been a structure. We never got a chance to investigate it. This was not a paying client.
Yeah.
But But yeah,
but
that
we
was
will take we'll take their sponsorship if you're listening.
yeah,
Call
exactly.
in and yeah.
Yeah. And so there are a number of these. I mean, like I grew up in Keswick Ridge, and one of the big stories there is about I talk about it in the interview with Darryl, but Curry Mountain, sort of halfway between Fredericton and Keswick Ridge, and there's sort of this story.
It's a secret Indian restaurant, isn't it?
Yeah, Curry Mountain. It was apparently a privateer or a pirate ship made its way up the Wolastoq in the 18th century, ran ashore. And they went and scurried up the mountain and buried treasure in the mountain. So there's always stories about people going up there to dig up treasure when I was a kid. And
that's a real Oak Island kind of parallel there.
Yeah, totally.
They thought about cashing in.
Well, so what's interesting though is that a few years ago, a friend of mine inherited or acquired this cannon that was part of where, like, the myth, the lore of this had always been that there was this farmer that lived down the end of our road in this very old century barn. And there had been rumors for a long time.
But he lived in the barn?
He lived in the house, but there was a barn that had this cannon.
Lived in the barn. Right, okay.
The cannon lived in the barn. And this always, and like I always assumed that this was just, a story. Well, so I've now seen the cannon, and it is without question like an 18th century British cannon, but without any provenance, but was tied into this Curry Mountain myth. So
no kidding.
If any listener can provide a little bit more detail on that story, or any of these stories, I mean, I'd be curious to see where they come from and what the what the sort of thread is that gets drawn out.
Yeah, that's right, listener. If you're a Norse descendant, we'd love to hear your family story and maybe a little genealogy here about how you managed to find your way here to the the Maritimes, or even to Lethbridge, Alberta.
Yeah, I'm sure there's lots of local myths around here. I mean, we have one in the Premier's office right now, so that's
Wait, is Marjorie Taylor Greene the head of
Not far off. So I think that I don't know, do we want to just roll into the conversation with Darryl here?
I think we're gonna roll into the conversation with Darryl, and I think we should cue the listener that there were a few technical glitches.
Yeah, I think I got most of those sorted out though.
Oh, holy cow! Okay, good for you. But in case the listener hears something, it was just, I think the internet in all three of our places was on and off.
Yeah. So I think actually when I was listening to it, his audio actually was not screwed up. We were getting thrown off by his video being kind of janky.
Oh, okay.
But the audio kind of just went along with things.
Oh, that's great. Good. Okay. So, listener, when you hear Ken and I sound bewildered, it's because Darryl's face is not moving, but his sound is. Which is how he tells jokes anyway, so don't worry about it. It's
yeah, exactly.
It's off-putting. Yeah. But yeah, and we really appreciate Darryl coming on. He is just one of these kind of all-star archaeologists who is doing an awful lot of good, I think, in the region.
Totally. He's a great person. If you run into him out monitoring or something, he seems capable of striking up a conversation with anybody.
He is, absolutely. And we'd tell you to hire him, except that I think he actually has work booked out through 2048. So
yeah. So we're gonna put his contact information in the show notes. And so if you're looking to pick up a shovel and head to Nova Scotia, I'm sure Darryl would take you.
All right, can we hold his business card up to the camera before we cut to Darryl's interview?
Yeah, there we go. So.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, it is our special guest star, Darryl Kelman. Tonight, listener, we're joined by Darryl Kelman, who has a BA in history from Waterloo and a master's in history from St. Andrews, and that focused in heritage resource management, which is what I understand in the UK they call cultural resource management. And he's worked in CRM in Atlantic Canada for over a decade, and also has extensive experience in Ontario, the UK, Italy, and in Panama. He's been on the board of virtually every Maritimes archaeology organization at one point or another, including with I think Ken and I on the board of the New Brunswick Archaeology, the Association of Professional Archaeologists of New Brunswick, and more recently on the Nova Scotia Archaeological Society and the Archaeological Land Trust of Nova Scotia. and he is currently the president and principal archaeologist for Kelman Heritage Consulting. Is that all still accurate, Darryl?
Yeah, it's accurate. Although I would say I'm now, although Kelman Heritage still exists, I'm now senior archaeologist with WSP, and I've been doing that
Okay.
more for the last 2 or 3 years. It's been more my full-time gig.
And
Fantastic. Okay.
And in terms of the Nova Scotia Archaeology Society, I was very much involved, but that was probably about 10 years ago. I don't want it to come across that I'm still super involved.
Don't worry, Darryl. We'll play up anything you want here on the. We appreciate you coming on. So yeah, that's right. You heard it here first, listener. Darryl owns the Nova Scotia Archaeological Society. I think he's actually broadcasting from their headquarters. But so, how was your season with WSP? Did you guys have a good season?
Oh, yeah, well, yeah. I mean, it's as you guys know, in consulting, the season never ends. So it's still going, and actually, the fall is often our busiest time. So we've been busy, and I expect the next few weeks we're going to get a lot of requests to get things done before the snow flies. So yeah.
I think the panicked phone calls are starting here in southern Alberta as it's snowing right now. I'm sure every company is getting that last whisper of oh, it's going to melt next week. I'm sure we can get you back out there.
Yeah. Has it been? It's been total madness.
Yeah,
sorry.
Oh, sorry. No, I was just going to say out here in Nova Scotia, the snow might not come until January. So they want you to keep going. And then, of course, in New Brunswick, it could be quite different, northern to southern. So, yeah, it's just get it done. And, well, we'll do the best we can.
Absolutely. It's been total madness out in CRM everywhere, I think, lately.
Yeah, it's a booming industry. You should let all your younger listeners should know it's a booming industry.
We'll put Darryl's email address in the show notes, and you can reach out to him for he's stocking up on crew as we speak, folks.
It's jobs@kelman.ca, I think. Is that but the real point to take home here is that Darryl Kelman is what they would call on the show Oak Island a top pocket find. I think that's what we were driving for on the intro here, and so he's really here to
that was good.
to talk.
That was good.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that, Darryl. So Darryl, I've never actually seen this show, but I've listened. I listened to 6 hours today of podcast about the Oak Island TV show, and then watched a series of YouTube clips. I've never watched the show all the way through. So wait. Listen, so these were not podcasts about Oak Island. These were podcasts about the Oak Island show specifically. That's right. Yeah, that's what we call show prep in the biz, Ken. So, but they're like, the podcasts aren't like necessarily about stories about Oak Island. It's like it's like the breaking down the episodes kind of podcast. Oh yeah, and then discussion. I listen to some what in baseball would be called hot stove talk. In between the seasons, they talk about what might be coming. There's at least a half dozen of these podcasts, each of which seems to be more popular than the one we are currently hosting. But so I don't know that we've tipped the listener off yet, but what we're here to talk about is we're really here to ask Darryl how many more people must die before the treasure of Oak Island reveals itself. But but as the listener will know, last week at least one. Yeah. To bring it to 7, I learned on these podcasts today. But we had Stef Halmhofer on last fortnight to talk about pseudoarchaeology, so we thought we'd go local. And Ken and I had a really good conversation with Darryl about the Oak Island television show, which is now at the Curse of Oak Island, now in season 11. It's on the History Channel, and it's produced by Prometheus Studios. And Darryl, correct me if any of this is wrong, but it deals with a legend that began in 1701 about buried treasure, probably Captain Kidd's buried treasure, I guess was the idea. And then that was supposed to be about 2 million pounds. And since then, legend has grown to include things like Marie Antoinette's treasure, the Knights Templar, the number of people who've died treasure hunting in these surely not health and safety proof pits. And the thing appears to be pseudoarchaeology. Is that more or less correct?
Well, yeah, in terms of it being pseudoarchaeology, yes. Everything you said before about what it may or may not be, I don't know all of the details. I only started watching the show in season 8. So all the previous iterations of what they thought they were looking for, or anything like that, I'm not an expert on, and I wouldn't ever claim to be.
So Darryl,
But-
you grew up on the East Coast, right?
No, I actually grew up in Ontario.
Oh, okay. So are either of you familiar with, so the way that I learned about Oak Island was, are either of you familiar with the book The Hand of Robin Squires?
No.
It's this
No.
novel, and I should have written down the name of the author. But as I was doing the prep for this, I came across the name of the book, and I was like, oh, this is where I learned about Oak Island. And it was a book that we read in school about basically this young boy that goes out. His uncle, he's a British boy that's brought to Nova Scotia with his uncle, who is, I think the claim is that he's there on some mission for the king and country or whatever. And he meets a young Mi'kmaq boy, and they happen upon this pit, which is like the money pit, basically the sort of the crux of where all this stuff is. And as it turns out, his through the story, his uncle is a privateer, and it involves, like, he hires, like, there's like slaves, like black slaves that are in the story, that are part of like burying this treasure that he's plundered from somebody. And then the hand is that the boy is like, his uncle sort of chains him onto this thing, and then cuts it. The Mi'kmaq boy comes back to save him and chops his hand off to get him out of his shackles, and they abscond, and then he goes down to somewhere in New England, basically. But this is like my exposure to it, and I had always thought in my headcanon was that this was the source of it, because I thought it was like, but this is a novelization of this origin story, Gabe, and it's like one of the various, like, kind of retellings of what the source of it is. Sometimes it's a group of teenage boys, sometimes it's this Robin Squires, and but it's never entirely clear, but it all centers on the money pit.
What makes me miss the battle days, Ken, when my introduction to Canadiana was 18 beers and heritage minutes, but with you, so I guess maybe if what is the show about, I guess, is where we would sort of maybe start.
Well, my understanding, and again, I only started watching in season 8, so I don't know what they did prior to that. But the show is about a search. It's a treasure hunt. It's a search for this treasure that is, according to local legend, and the story that Ken was just describing. There is some sort of treasure buried on Oak Island, which people have been looking for the last 50, 60 years or so. And in doing so, they have, done a lot of excavations on the island. Extensive excavations on the island. And the story, it's just... it just keeps getting bigger and bigger, every time it goes from, whatever the treasure is, you hear these stories that maybe it's something even more fantastic than just treasure. Not that the show gets into that too much, at least lately, but yeah, as far as I can understand, it's just these two guys who are American. I'm not entirely sure where they're from, or where their money's from, but the Lagina brothers, and they seem genuinely interested. It was a story, I guess, one of them had heard as a kid, and he wants to find the treasure, and his older brother or younger brother, I can't remember which one's older, wants to help him. They seem to have a reasonable amount of funding behind them, and away they go.
They found their money pit, and that is that's the island, I guess. That's
Yeah,
They
exactly. That is one of the kind of one of the jokes or comments is that the actual money is the fact that the show has been on for 10 years. It's going into its 11th season. They still haven't found it, but the show keeps going, and the guys running the show seem to be doing all right. And I mean, it's providing a boost to the local economy in a way. So maybe that is the treasure.
Yeah, it might well be. But speaking of treasure, one would ordinarily think in this situation that the treasure would actually be the numerous lawsuits being filed. You would just intuitively think that this would be not legal. But my understanding is that there was in Nova Scotia a Treasure Trove Act, and now there's an Oak Island Act. Is this something that you could sort of catch us up on, or give us a kind of cliff notes on?
I can try, because I was involved a bit in the repealing of the Treasure Trove Act. So I don't remember exactly what year the Treasure Trove Act came into being, but it was really designed to be an act where you could look for treasure on Oak Island, similar to the way the British have a treasure trove sort of system, where if you were to find a hoard of gold or copper or some kind of rare jewels that were buried on your property, the government would get some of it for the research purposes, but you would actually get a lot of the monetary components of it. The problem was in Nova Scotia, the legislation for just all of archaeology in general was fairly weak, and the Treasure Trove Act, which was where a lot of this work on Oak Island was operating under prior to the show, it was being applied to other resources, particularly shipwrecks. And that was a big deal, is that people would say, well, I'm going for this Treasure Trove Act, but I'm excavating on a shipwreck. And the archaeological community fought that for years and years. And so when I showed up in Nova Scotia and started doing archaeology, it was already a battle that was happening. And around 2010 or so, finally convinced the government to repeal the Treasure Trove Act as it existed and put things like shipwrecks under just the normal Special Places Protection Act, which covers all of archaeological resources. But they then also created the Oak Island Act, which is a separate act, and it covers only Oak Island. And it just covers, searching for treasure on Oak Island. And part of the reason why they did that was because the island is, well, in their mind at the time, was so heavily disturbed because of all this constant treasure hunting that they didn't really need to worry about other things being found necessarily on the island, which hasn't turned out exactly the way I think it was intended. But so yeah, the deep digging anyway that happens on Oak Island on the show is all covered under a different act. So it is technically not considered archaeological, and Special Places isn't overly concerned about it, and in a lot of cases, rightfully so. Some of it is stuff that has just been excavated and excavated and excavated and excavated. But there are sections of Oak Island, obviously, that has been shown through the show that are not as heavily disturbed as they once thought.
So was there a considerable lobby to keep it from being? So that seems like an interesting carve out, right? To just sort of immediately be like, well, Oak Island is fine, because if you're the government, you're sort of sitting there being like, well, there are presumably important ships, there are other interesting things that people have been diving on. What was the lobby that drove the carve out for the Oak Island Act, do you think?
That's a good question. I'm not entirely sure. I think, and again, I'm not entirely sure. It may have just been a case of, pick your battles kind of thing.
Sure.
And it's like, you know what, keep Oak Island as a place where people can look for treasure, and make sure they don't go looking for treasure on shipwrecks. and
That's
that kind of
interesting.
thing.
Yeah, so if they sort of pick over Oak Island, they won't be running around on shipwrecks.
Yeah.
And
So you mentioned though that that there are parts of the island that are less disturbed, and that in recent seasons on the show they've come across stuff. So in like maybe provide some background on that, and in that context, does that mean that does the Historic Places Act, which is the act that sort of protects archaeological resources throughout Nova Scotia, and presume and like many acts in Canada, basically prohibits disturbance of an archaeological site or conducting archaeological work without a permit. So does the Historic Places Act apply to certain parts of Oak Island, or can it apply to the whole island but in sort of like the top surfaces, or do you sort of it's up to a group of people to determine whether or not it's undisturbed enough that the Historic Places Act applies? Like, how is that, or do you have a sense of how that works, and how it's being applied sort of in the active work that's going on at Oak Island today?
Well, that's a good question, and as an outsider, as somebody who's in the business but also watching the show, I'm not 100% sure. But the last couple years of the show, they have been very explicit that the work they're doing is under permit, and they have a permitted archaeologist on site. And what I believe is that there are certain sections of the island where the archaeologist is allowed to say, it's heavily disturbed, go ahead and do whatever you want, dig as deep as you want, because they're using giant like boring machines that just go down way down. And I think in those cases the archaeologist is like, yeah, go ahead. But there are also other sections of the island where the archaeologist is, I think, doing proper work. It's just that doesn't get televised because it doesn't fit the narrative of the show. It's not fascinating and all that.
It seems
I
like
can't
a
really
missed
say.
opportunity, to like
Well,
highlight that.
absolutely, it is a totally missed opportunity. But I don't really know because I'm not involved. I'm just an outsider watching the show. But I get the impression that there is actually some really, really fascinating archaeology happening on the island, but it doesn't fit the narrative of the show, so we don't get to see it. Hopefully, we will eventually. But yeah, in terms of whether they're following the rules and all that, yeah, I'm sure they are. I mean, I don't think there's any way the show would be happening if there was anything nefarious going on, or if they weren't obeying the rules. And like I said, in the last couple seasons, they seem to be pretty explicit about the fact that they do have a permitted archaeologist who does this other work, to let them do what they're doing, so that the show can continue. Yeah.
the podcasts were rather agitated about that point. Apparently, I think it was season, I would say 9. Was that when they had a slow start due to some permitting trouble involving a wetland?
Yeah. So from the show, if I recall, the archaeological team actually identified a Mi'kmaq site, and they had found some Mi'kmaq artifacts, and that slowed a lot of activity for obvious reasons in terms of what an archaeologist would say. But I think a lot of fans of the show got a little upset, saying, well, why is that happening? And it's because they had identified an actually significant site. So due process, and you got to do regulatory, but also just ethically, and what an archaeologist would do. Sometimes that doesn't make the most exciting TV.
Yeah, sure.
So
yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And so Ken, actually, I'm wondering, as I hear this, and I hear we're talking about this particular sort of the Oak Island Act, right? That makes me think a lot about the advocacy you're doing at the CIA level for federal heritage legislation, which one imagines would not include something such as the Oak Island Act. And I wonder, if you have any thoughts about that.
about how the Oak Island Act relates to the federal heritage legislation,
or about perhaps the Oak Island Act sort of as an argument for federal legislation, or something to be these
the challenge,
highly localized things. Yeah.
yeah. So I think the challenge there is that so in Canada and and to a certain extent, the states, but more so in Canada, archaeological regulation and legislation has been devolved to the provinces and territories, right? And so anything that falls within provincial or territorial jurisdiction is basically land surface resources along with archaeological resources are considered sort of the jurisdiction of the province, right? And so funny enough, like with Oak Island, so you'd have federal jurisdiction over the water between the island itself and the shoreline, and actually to the high tide line probably in both areas. But you have provincial jurisdiction on the islands themselves, right? And so even where federal heritage legislation passed, I'm not sure how much of an impact it would have on this, in part because there's sort of this like I think there's this kind of balance they have to do where within the federation they kind of have to, play ball with each other and respect each other's territories. And I don't think, because of the way that the Bill C-23 is crafted, it's not going to provide a sort of more robust archaeological protection for archaeology falling on provincial or territorial lands. But I mean, it does, it would probably provide sort of a better background to, why are there's sort of exclusions to the Historic Places Act. And in particular, I think one of the things kind of interesting to this is that, the Historic Places Act and the work that's gone on, the archaeology work that's discovered that there are intact Mi'kmaq sites there, sort of calls into question why the Oak Island Act is even allowed to sort of, continue, right? Because even in most cases, and Darryl, you can probably attest to this working in CRM, and I've attested to it working in CRM, even when you're working under archaeological permits, you have the authority as an archaeologist to make a judgmental call in an area that we don't need to do archaeological work here because, there's 8 feet of crushed rock down to bedrock here. And so there's absolutely nothing archaeological remaining, right? And so the Oak Island Act in some ways is sort of just...
Sorry, Ken, that crushed rock I learned on the podcast today is actually, it's the road they built to load the treasure chest into the money pit.
Is this the Roman road or the Atlantean road?
No. It might just be practical to just keep your your nice Templar. I don't want to get their boots wet.
Yeah,
it's Portuguese.
Oh, is it? I missed that there.
Okay,
thank you. Would you care to? The listener cannot see, but my
I don't care to elaborate.
Yeah, both of my co-hosts just took a deep swig of their whiskey as they pondered their experience with that question. But
And so Darryl, I think you kind of touched on something interesting. And so you've talked a little bit about how they've actually been finding some interesting archaeological stuff, and we brought this up earlier. What is archaeology losing from not being able to promote sort of, the archaeology that we all do in a way that, like, we talked about this with Stephanie as well. Like, is it the fault of the archaeologists that we're not able to sort of promote archaeology in the kinds of ways that you get this glitzy, high production value television show on the History Channel and still find really fascinating stuff like these Mi'kmaq artifacts and these intact sites, and that this island that's been pockmarked by machinery since the 19th century, somehow there's still some really intact, like, kind of fascinating stuff there. Like, is it kind of on us to promo that sort of stuff better? Is it on to be able to kind of make, like, can we get these sort of compelling sort of 6 podcasts about a show narratives going in archaeology that we can promote sort of ethical and responsible and sort of daily practice archaeology in a way that looking for treasure of Marie Antoinette's jewels, or what else? What are some of these other ones here? I read Atlantis. I read one of them that Atlantis came up, as it usually does in a lot of these things. But
it seems to all come back to the Knights Templar. They're very into the Knights Templar having a lot of
yeah,
loot.
and Masons. Yeah, lots of Masons.
Yeah.
And apparently, Franklin Roosevelt was involved at one point. Was funding this.
Oh, you don't say. No, I thought he was Campobello, which was a different one without a special act. That's okay.
Yeah. But yeah, so what do you think,
Yeah.
Darryl? Like, is it something that we can work better at? Is it just that the archaeology we do isn't conducive to, these supercuts, of, like you recovering a flake from a screen and the camera kind of panning in really quickly?
Yeah. Well, two things. First, I do believe one of the Roosevelts was involved, because they do seem to mention him on the show. But honestly, I can't remember what the details were on that. But yeah, I would say, Ken, to your main question, I do think in this instance it's the responsibility of the archaeological community to get more involved. Because the pseudoarchaeologists, the people that make the show, the producers, they're just going to do what they're going to do, and they have an audience, and they know they have an audience. And so for professional archaeologists, whether they be academic or consultants, it's up to us to get involved in the conversation, and not in an antagonistic way, just you know in an open discussion. And I find, and maybe you guys have as well, I introduce myself to someone. I'm out working on some site, and somebody says, "Oh, what do you do?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm the archaeologist." "Oh, have you ever heard of this Oak Island show?" And I mean, that's perfect. You can go in. You don't go into it and say, "What a stupid show, I hate it." You go in and you go, "Yeah, I've seen it. What do you think about it?" And then you get this discussion going, and you open up that discussion to people, and you get to a point where you can say to them, "Well, here are the issues that I have with the show, but this is based on what I know, and this is based on my experience. And then what do you think?" And you open it up as a discussion, not as an attack, not as a "How dare you watch Oak Island? You must be an idiot." And I think it is on us, as the archaeologists, to do that, because the sort of pseudo archaeological group, the people that believe this stuff and perpetuate this stuff, they're very active. They will say they're all over social media, like you say. They've got podcasts, they've got blogs, they're all over the place. And one of their arguments is that the professional archaeologists, one of their things is, well, the professional archaeologist is going to tell you that I'm lying. Well, yeah, you know what I mean? It's like the fake news. It's like, well, it's fake news, but what we need to do is open up the discussions and have those discussions with people. And I think that's our best way forward. So yeah, I think we need to do more as an archaeological community, professional archaeologists, academics, consultants, even just reasonable amateurs who have a good head on their shoulders. Just engage in discussion. And there are people, obviously, in the pseudo-archaeological field that you'll never convince, ever. I mean, they've got their mindset, they've got they're dug in, and you'll never change their mind. But that's not the person you're trying to convince. It's the normal, just a regular average Joe who doesn't know anything about archaeology. This is the first time they've ever heard of it. And that's the person you want to talk to and say, well, yeah, what they're saying might be true, but here are 50 other things that are way more reasonable about this particular story. So I do think there is a responsibility on us to participate in
So I
that.
think the listener is going to be struck. So Darryl, because we have not published it yet, it has just actually. So Stephanie Halmhofer just on our last. This will be now we're a fortnight apart, Darryl. When you doing a little bit of time travel here, sit tight. But we asked Stephanie what was her advice for countering pseudoarchaeology, and she essentially just outlined the exact method that you have outlined for dealing with.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going to say she said the exact opposite.
Oh no, it was uncanny, including the bit about there will be 10% you can't reach or something like that.
Yeah, no, it was shockingly parallel. And one of the other things that she brought up was that on top of this, the same idea that, it's on us to sort of be out there and speaking about it. And she introduced us this term called pre-bunking, which is that if we're out there talking about this in the archaeological community more often, the people that are going to be picking up the Curse of Oak Island are going in there with some sense of like, okay, well, this is how archaeology is done normally in the province, and these are the kinds of things that you would expect to find in an archaeological site in Nova Scotia on sort of a day-to-day basis. And they're doing things very differently here, and then they're sitting down to watch this show. I'm like, oh, this is a little bit different than what I understand archaeology of Nova Scotia to be, right?
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, no, I'm glad we were on the same wavelength.
Absolutely. If you could focus in maybe a little bit just on in your experience, because I think this might be helpful for some of our listeners. Just why is the Curse of Oak Island TV show harmful in your experience as an archaeologist who works a lot in Nova Scotia?
Okay. I guess it's difficult because I haven't, to be honest, I haven't found the show to be particularly harmful, because what it does is, like I just said, it opens up that opportunity for discussion. You meet somebody, they say, oh, you're an archaeologist. Probably about 15 years ago, I've been doing archaeology in Nova Scotia for over 20 years. And before the show, you would say you're an archaeologist, and they say, oh, what kind of dinosaurs have you found? Or they'd want to know about the rock. They would get confused about paleontology and geology. Now, when you say you're an archaeologist, they actually do kind of understand what it is you do. And then you do get the questions about Oak Island. I guess pseudoarchaeology itself can become dangerous when it becomes about things like when it becomes racialized or something like that. The Oak Island show hasn't really, I don't think, done that yet, so it's not really a dangerous show in that regard, but it's kind of a slippery slope. So it's well along the lines of, we need to respond to this show as a profession, and respond to what is depicted on TV, not necessarily what's happening behind the scenes. I do believe there is some good archaeology happening behind the scenes that's just not being televised. But what's being shown sometimes, let the professional community needs to sort of respond and say, well, here we think this in terms of the interpretation. In terms of what the show has done, in terms of damaging archaeology, or perception of archaeology in Nova Scotia, it may have had an impact in other areas that I'm just not aware of. I haven't really noticed it. Maybe and maybe when they found the Mi'kmaq artifacts, there may have been some, backlash online directed towards the Mi'kmaq about that, but I don't know. The show has done a very good job of downplaying any backlash they receive. Obviously, they don't want you to know.
Well, good news, Darryl. Reddit has been here. Oh, sorry, but yeah, the minute they found a piece of native pottery, the trench dig and road excavation was shut down instantly. If Mi'kmaq items are interlaced with the treasure, there's going to be a very long and expensive court case involving the fellowship, the Canadian government, the native representation in its country of origin. Be that, you ready for this? England, France, or Israel. So it
So there,
takes us, yeah,
and there you go, pseudoarchaeology becoming
yeah,
racialized, like, and
Yeah.
yeah,
that's the danger, right?
Yeah.
And
yeah,
it happens, and it's been happening for, I mean, as long as archaeology has existed as a discipline, so has pseudoarchaeology, for political or racial reasons, gains, right?
yeah.
So
I think it's well put.
that's that's the danger. So you know, as although the Oak Island show in many cases seems very benign in terms of the pseudo archaeology, um, you know, it's still something that the professional community needs to address. And again, I mean what they show on the actual show. I do again believe that there is some good archaeology happening behind the scenes that we're not seeing because it doesn't fit the narrative of the show. So you're not seeing it, but the work is happening, and maybe I hope when the show is done and everybody can get away from their non-disclosure agreements, we'll hear about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's like
Absolutely.
so one of the things we wanted to ask too is like so I remember when I was at U of T, um this would have been, I guess, probably leading into the, I don't know, seventh or eighth or ninth season, somewhere around there. Prometheus actually contacted essentially the whole student body of the anthropology department, only the students, like only the students, none of the faculty or anything like that, in an open casting call looking for an archaeologist to join their show, right? Which you know, we responded by writing a letter. The Archaeology Center kind of wrote a letter to Prometheus and said that, you know, this is not like, you should be hiring professional archaeologists. You know, so and the challenge there is that I think it looked like what they were trying to do was hire students who were archaeologists and sort of promote them as professional archaeologists. And we brought in these pros, and, you know, we're doing things really above board, when in fact it wasn't really kind of following what standard procedure would be for sort of how, you know, how a professional is in there. So like, how do you respond to an archaeologist or a student who says, I'm going to get involved because that way someone responsible is there at least, or if, you know, for example, they think that they can do some good there, right? Like you said, that part of the problem is that, you know, there's probably good archaeology going on there, but it's all ending up on the cutting room floor. And so is this something that, you know, you would recommend somebody, you know, if you really want to kind of go out there and tackle that, go ahead? Or is it something you would caution, just because, you know, if you watch the show, you'll see that your role may be downplayed in a way that kind of actually like could damage, you know, sort of your reputation outside of the show, right? Like, is that something that you would where would you fall on that?
Um, that's a really good question. I would. I have two minds, and the one is, if you're young and trying to, you know, make it and do all that, this probably isn't the right venue. Um, and because, well, it's tough. The show might. I don't know. I've never worked on a show like that, so I don't know. The show might put you in a tough spot, and you might have to, you know, say something you might regret. I don't really get the sense that that's the case. In terms of this particular show, I do know that the archaeologist that they have has been around a long time and is a veteran archaeologist. Like, he knows the system. He knows. I think he knows what he's doing. And so that might be why you don't see him that much on the show doing outrageous things. because
His
he
tone
knows
is
what he's
very measured
doing.
on his podcast interviews, in my experience.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I mean, he you know, um, yeah, he knows what he's doing. I mean, he's been around. He was been around longer than me. And one of the first jobs I worked on in Nova Scotia, he was one of the supervisors. So I mean, he's been around a long time. So yeah, I think if I was to advise a young person trying to break in, I would say this might not be what you want to do, find a good field school, maybe go to Maine with Gabe or something like that.
I
And
love
you
that
heard it here,
advice,
folks.
Darryl.
The Northeast Archaeology Labs SIP Bay Field School running
That's
again in
right.
2024.
That's right, listener. Ken peeled off his lizard mask to promote it. And Darryl is a Knights Templar, but we don't talk about it on the show. It's okay.
Yeah. And you said too that but it also sound you said that the archaeologists working there have signed are made to sign NDAs, like non-disclosure agreements, and so it's difficult to even, I'm guessing it's difficult to even access like the archaeological reporting that's coming out of that, because like is it sort of protected by the production, that kind of thing?
Well, okay. So again, I don't know 100%. That is actually an assumption on my part that they have signed some sort of an agreement. But again, and maybe I'm just looking at it through rose-colored glasses, but I think that when the show is done, when they finally decide that they've either found the treasure or they're going to give up, the archaeology that is being done, we will get to hear about. And I don't think it's going to be anything the History Channel publishes or shows. It's not going to be a show. It's not going to be anything spectacular. It's going to be something that us, as archaeologists working in Nova Scotia, are going to get to see. And some of the sites that seem to be on the island are very, very interesting. And that's the thing, is that the show, it keeps making it out like, oh, look, this little piece of metal leads us to this fantastic treasure. But it's like, but you do realize it seems like you've got really cool sites on this island anyway.
Yeah.
And you need it to be this weird, fantastic thing. But my hope is that there will be something that comes out from the archaeologists working on the island, doing the actual work that is happening behind the scenes. You don't get to see it. You do get to see it a little bit. Every now and then the camera crew will show, if they find something interesting, camera crew will show up, and they'll be there digging with their trowels, and the camera crew will say, hey, have you found anything? It's like, oh, I just found this. And obviously that's not they didn't just find it, but they knew that they had found something. But still, I mean, I do think there is some really good, I think there's some fascinating archaeology on that island. And I think we will hear about it, but just not while the show's on. And again, I don't know that they have signed NDAs, but I feel like there must be something, because the show wouldn't want people working on the show to say, hey, by the way, I found this, outside of the narrative of the show, because they really like the show has a structure.
Yeah.
Where certain people find things, and they have all their fancy toys, and they have their narrator, and it's got a formula. And
Yeah, like I remember in the first couple seasons, it's set up in kind of a narrative way that, like, it's all leading to, like, I feel like the first season all led up to them finding like a nail on the beach basically, like, and it was, the whole season was like cut scenes of them like, whoa, like, like sort of this, like, somebody's got this aha moment, and then the last scene is like them holding up like a corroded piece of metal.
Yep.
Yeah,
they find a lot of metal. They have a guy on the show who is a metal detector expert, and he finds a lot of stuff, and that is a big part of the show, is him going out with somebody, and he finds things, and then they go and get them looked at. And I guess that's one of the big problems with the show, is the interpretive leaps that they make. They're trying to find this treasure, and they find a piece of metal, like that big, a metal, little tiny little piece of metal, a strap, and they find it with the metal detector guy, and he makes it out to be a big deal. Like, oh, look at this. So then they go and they have a blacksmithing expert who looks at all of their metal pieces, and he'll look at it and he'll say, yeah, that looks like a strap, like an old iron strap. And then someone will say, A strap for what? Like a barrel? And he goes, no, not a barrel. And they'll say, like a chest. He goes, yes, it's a strap from a chest. And then somebody else will go, do you mean like a big chest? Oh, yeah, a big chest. What would you put in a chest like that? I can only think of one thing. It's probably treasure. And then they get all the looks around. It's like, oh, and that's the hook. And then cut to commercial.
Yeah.
And then you narrate it like, next time on the Curse of Oak Island. And it's just unbelievable. The leaps that they make.
Yeah.
Another leap they made was, they found a lot of evidence of activity on the island, like significant activity on the island, pre all of this looking for treasure. And a lot of it, ox shoes and big heavy iron chains and things. It's like, well, it could be just lumbering, but to them, it's like, no, why would anybody be trying to get things off the island? It's all about getting things to the money pit. It's like, oh, we've got this big chain. Well, you'd only use a chain like that to move a big chest inland. You'd never use it to move something out. It's
like an oak tree that you might use for a mast for a ship. Like
I know, yeah. So that, and then I mean the narrator actually is fantastic. I suspect he doesn't even know much about the show. That's his job. He's the narrator. And he's fantastic because he's always like, could it be? And that's become sort of a tagline of the show is, could it be?
Yeah. Straps like this were used in Templar ceremonies in the mid 18th century. Yeah.
Well, that's the thing is this blacksmith guy kind of looks at something and goes, yeah. And like, again, it's a little tiny piece of iron. And I don't know. I'm not a blacksmith, so maybe he does know. But he'll look at it and go, yeah, that's from a chest. Had to be, really, really big. And probably from the 1500s. And I was like, what? It's just this piece of iron. It's really dug out. So, I don't know. But
and part, actually, this is actually part of the reason we want to have you on, Darryl, is that we thought you were better perhaps than we were at explaining kind of this to the public, right? That there's these differences in archaeological reasoning versus like how the public would like things to go, right? So is this anomaly created by humans or by nature? If it's by humans, what's the most parsimonious explanation? And then unfortunately that's rarely that it's a nice Templar or buried treasure or whatever. And so then it's usually like kind of well down the line where you have to try to convey that, as you've just done, to the public, where it's a little bit absurd. Ken and I have enjoyed this every time you've explained it.
Well, yeah, I mean, honestly, what is it? Is it the Occam's razor thing where sometimes the simplest explanation is the truth? But in archaeology, sometimes the simplest explanation is still really fascinating. People always are looking for the grand story, well, it's Knights Templar treasure or whatever, but whatever that artifact is, it could still be tied to, it's still tied to somebody. And that person had a family, they had parents. It's still an interesting story that is worth investigating properly. You don't just throw it off as, if it's not Knights Templar, I'm not interested. That's not what we do. Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. There's sort of an interesting history of the island that's really never actually been explored in any way, because it became this treasure island before anybody, had an opportunity to kind of explore, like, the Mi'kmaq occupation there, and then the post-contact occupation, probably for various different purposes, like agrarian. I'm sure it was an outpost of some kind, during the early colonial days and that kind of thing. Like, I that's the other thing too, is I think that the show also doesn't make the listener aware that, like, in these coastal regions in the South Shore of Nova Scotia, it's like, it's not unheard of that people were sailing here, like, your European ships in this area for several hundred years, right? Like, Flotsam and Jetsam may like push stuff up onto the shoreline. Like you take a metal detector probably to many of these banks, you're going to find a scrap of iron that you could interpret as a chest piece or something. But
Yeah,
you know,
Flotsam and Jetsam are actually the two blacksmiths on the show. I think I didn't catch their names entirely, but yeah, but no, I think both of you are raising these like really important points about just this idea that the actual archaeology is just as exciting.
I didn't want to name just out it.
Sorry, we promised Darryl we wouldn't put the Sioux in issue on this on this program. So, but I was struck actually as I was listening to over 6 hours of Oak Island podcast today, the similarities between Oak Island podcast and like AM sports talk radio. Like, have you ever driven somewhere at maybe like 2 a.m, anywhere in the proximity of New York City, and you put on the AM sports talk radio, and someone is just there, just kind of yelling about like, well, obviously the problem is that they just didn't trade for that closer. They clearly needed a left-handed closer. And you said to yourself, well, I don't know. It's 162 games a year. I don't know that this one situation and the lack of a left-handed closer really broke it. But it is this sort of like the degree to which you're able to approach these tiny, tiny situations without any idea of the whole, right?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Holy cow, Gabe, that was one of the best metaphors I've heard in a while. That was fantastic.
I didn't know you listened to so much AM talk radio, Darryl. But yeah.
Apparently, I listened to it too, but yeah.
But yeah, no, it felt a lot like that. It felt a lot like that to me, and but alarmingly so. So when you're doing, how often does Oak Island come up when you're doing professional archaeology in Nova Scotia, Darryl? Is it pretty ubiquitous?
Yeah, it comes up. I wouldn't say on every project, but yeah, it comes up a lot. And it can come up from either members of the public who you're dealing with. It can come up when you're on a construction site, and you're just kind of monitoring, and some guy will walk up to you and go, "So, what do you think about Oak Island?" So yeah, it comes up a fair bit, and it's tricky because, well, I live here and I live on the South Shore, and I know a lot of people who work on the show. Not well. I mean, I'm not like close with anybody, but I try and treat it. I like I said earlier. We need to, as a profession, respond to this. So I always try, whenever somebody brings it up, I always try to engage them and say, well, yes, I have seen the show. I have some issues with it. What do you think of the show? And then, hopefully get into a dialogue. But often it doesn't go very far. I mean, a lot of them kind of go, yeah, I know it's BS, but I still enjoy watching it, is kind of the response I get from a lot of people.
Yeah, I was telling you, like,
that's how I feel too. I mean, I do enjoy kind of watching it as a sort of guilty pleasure.
Yeah, no, totally. In fact, I was telling, I think, Ken last fortnight that I was struck when I was in West Virginia during the pandemic, how many people had seen The Curse of Oak Island, and their reaction was almost essentially the one you're describing. Like, well, I bet you don't do this kind of archaeology, and I know it's probably not quite real, but it's a lot of fun. And I think your both of your points earlier about just conveying the interest and the fun of ordinary archaeology is maybe the challenge we face, and the dialogue you discuss, opening up that dialogue, and all the work you've done with things like the Nova Scotia Archaeology Society that does that, right? Where you guys are bringing in, lecture series, all sorts of opportunities for folks that are interested in archaeology to go and talk to archaeologists, to meet archaeologists, and to hear about all the great archaeology that's going on the South Shore and elsewhere in Nova Scotia.
Yeah. And I think too, it's like, you know, because like you pointed out, Darryl, the catch, like the hook on that show is that they jump to these interpretations like right off the bat, right? And you know, and I think that in some ways, you know, like we want to be very cautious and measured in our interpretations because they, you know, they have some bearing when you're, you know, particularly when you're working like on indigenous archaeology, and there can be some implications for, you know, sort of the way you interpret things and the way we sort of go about this. But I do think that in some ways, part of that education is also sort of teaching that jump, that, you know, that immediate I know what this is, that aha moment, is actually very much not part of what we do, but that there can be kind of those things, like, you know, like sort of talk about like a projectile point, for example. You find something, you can actually kind of have one of those aha moments where you can actually talk about what people were doing at a particular time, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
And
the
so,
Knights
you know,
Templar are always corner notched.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. They're straight, yeah, contracting stemmed with a, you know, with wide shoulders, I think is the
the trick about the Knights Templar is it's that flake off the base. That's diagnostic Knights Templar.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But another thing added on to Ken, what you're saying is, you know, a lot of the pseudo-archaeologists, the ones who particularly the ones that spout this stuff, not necessarily the ones who listen to it, but the ones who spout it, you can't change their minds. The thing about archaeologists is, yes, you can change their minds. As more data and more information comes in, your interpretation of certain things will change. And that is, I think, an important distinction to make as well, is that, you know, yes, we have ideas and we have interpretations based on data, but when that data changes, our interpretation will change too. So I think it's, you know, but these other guys are always like, no, this is how it is, and you don't believe me because you sit in your ivory tower and you won't listen to me. But we can change our minds. You know, we have that ability, and we do. It's all about the data, right?
Yeah.
It's all about the data.
Listener, as we get to half-finished bottles of Courvoisier, I'm actually not sure we could finish it on a better piece of advice than what Darryl just shared with you all. And I wonder if that's perhaps where we should park this.
Yeah, basically the scientific method, I think, is what what we've come back to, is sort of the you know, I think that is incredibly important to our work, and incredibly important to the way we communicate too.
All right, Darryl. So I think we'll leave it there. And it was a delight to have you on the program. And so as the snow flies in Lethbridge, Alberta, we're told you're going to go back out in the field pretty soon. And so best wishes for the hottest part of the CRM season, which is also unfortunately the coldest part of Nova Scotia. So, and we really appreciate you coming on to share some of your knowledge about all this, and you know, and in particular, a lot of your work that just really articulates with sort of talking to the public about these popular issues in archaeology, and trying to emphasize the kind of work that archaeologists are doing that can be just as interesting as the Oak Island show, and kind of winning them over one conversation at a time. So thanks very much for being on the program.
Yeah, thanks, Darryl. Thanks for coming on.
Well, thanks to you guys. I'm a fan of the show, so hopefully you keep going. Appreciate it.
Oh, thanks, Darryl. We really appreciate that. We're a fan of yours, as you know. So we'll have you back on, I think, someday for a CRM roundup. Was a program we've been talking about having. So
yeah, and when we find the treasure, of course.
Well, no. But there'll only be one of us at that point. It'll be a solo pod.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Sounds good.
That's what I worried he'd say. All right, gentlemen. All right. We'll have a good
thanks,
night.
Darryl.
And listener, thanks for tuning in. That was Darryl Kelman, currently with WSP, but who also has his own consultancy, Kelman Heritage, there on the South Shore of Nova Scotia. Thanks very much, Darryl.
Thanks, guys.
Have a good night. Well, that was a fun conversation.
That was, yeah. No, it's always good to talk to Darryl. I mean, he's one of the just one of the greats, I think, doing work around here.
Yeah, we should definitely try to get him to Saskatoon.
We should. Do you think is he planning on going, you figure?
I don't know. He usually goes to CAAs, but I don't know. Saskatoon's like not, I don't know. It's not a marquee destination. I don't know.
That's a haul. Was he in Alberta? I don't think he was in Alberta.
I don't think so.
No. We would have seen him, so no.
Yeah.
Because we would have had a drink with him, I suspect. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, so I think we would love to tell the listener that all of our hit pieces are about Oak Island. But they are not. They're about something much more dangerous. That's right, listener. Even more dangerous than Oak Island.
So I think it is time for hit pieces then.
Right. And are we talking smack this time?
All right, listeners. So this week, I think if you're playing bingo right now, I think you may have just heard the what is the inhale? How's it
aspirated yes.
Yeah. The aspirated yes.
Yeah.
I think it's yeah. And so this week's hit piece features friend of the show, Dr. Nadine Byers, and co-host Dr. Gabriel Reineck. An article that just came out in the SA Archaeological Record. And for those of you who are interested, this is an open access magazine style publication that the Society for American Archaeology puts out quarterly. And so if you are interested in learning about sort of some of the kind of hot topics in archaeology, some of the new trends and theory and method, sometimes there are special issues. It's a great venue. And for those of you who aren't affiliated with an institution where you have university access to journals and that sort of thing, it is a way that you can actually pick up on academic archaeology without paying out the wazoo for that or being affiliated. So the title of the article is a life-saving part of an archaeologist's first aid kit.
And we should just say that the thing Ken is about to describe, it's a drug. It does not go in your wazoo. It goes in your nose.
Yeah. And so this life-saving part of the archaeologist field first aid kit is naloxone. And so, Gabe, do you want to tell us a little bit about how this this article came about? For those of you wondering too, Dr. Nadine Byers is an actual doctor, and so and works in the emergency rooms in New Hampshire.
So she doesn't work in the emergency room. She works in the in a outpatient family practice, but also does obstetrical care, but has an interest in addiction medicine. She's also my wife, I guess.
Yeah. I wasn't sure how you wanted to frame that. So yeah.
No. So there are a number of emergencies, but mostly not in the emergency room, is my understanding. But,
okay.
Yeah.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about how this article came about and what you guys are bringing to sharing with the audience?
Yeah, absolutely. And so the Down East Maine Field School takes place in rural Maine, and as we were sort of prepping, Nadine said that she thought we should consider putting Narcan, which is brand name naloxone, in our first aid kit, because it's there's a number of reasons that the listener might think about doing this. And I think we're gonna have Nadine on to actually talk about the details of this more and sort of what Narcan does. But basically it reverses the effects of an opiate overdose. And opiates are used in abundance, unfortunately, in many communities in North America, probably elsewhere too, and are risky. And they, among those communities, are rural communities. It's not just an urban problem, and also university students. And so we were concerned that there could be either an overdose among students or among a community sort of bystander, because we work in public places. And so the idea was having a bit of this would not be a bad idea. Around the time we were writing the article, it became an over-the-counter prescription, just an over-the-counter drug in the United States that you could buy. So
and do you know if that's the case in Canada now?
I am not sure, and we can, when we have Nadine on to talk about it, I guess we'll check on that.
Yeah.
But so it was the first season we actually had it in the kit was last season, and Nadine was able to write a script for us to get one.
Okay.
And And then this year we just actually to test it for the article, I just walked in with Nadine and told the pharmacist I wanted some. It was fairly affordable. It was like $80 American.
You were testing if you could buy it. You weren't testing the naloxone itself.
No, I wasn't. Yeah. I'm a super taster. I know all the flavors of naloxone.
Yeah.
It's and it unfortunately does not come in a lovely mint flavor.
No.
And but no, and the point of the article is just that this is a thing that you should perhaps be cognizant of, especially if you're working in the kind of area that maybe rural and underserved. It's a long ambulance ride in Maine to the sort of place you'd be going.
Yeah, and I think anybody who works in rural New Brunswick or is from rural New Brunswick is, understands that too. The closures of rural emergency rooms, sort of consolidation of medical resources to particular locations, and the difficulty in getting even ambulance service to some of these places. 911, I don't think was across the board in New Brunswick until a few years ago, basically. And so depending upon where you were, you had to know the number for the emergency services. And so I think this is a great idea. And Gabe mentioned that Nadine is going to come on the program here to talk about this a little bit more. And so one of the things what we're planning for the spring is, in the lead into the field season, the New Brunswick Archaeology podcast is actually going to do an episode sort of highlighting health and safety, and some of the ways that you can prepare for the field season, some of the things that you can do as either a field director or somebody who's participating in an archaeological dig. Maybe you're going out in the CRM world, and just some tips and some guidance on how we navigate this. And as somebody who worked in the private sector for a large company that, was really had safety top of mind. There's a safety culture in a lot of environmental consulting businesses. It can come off as a little bit silly sometimes, but the take home point with a lot of this stuff is that we all enjoy the work that we do. We understand that sometimes the work that we do can actually be kind of dangerous, and nobody wants to end up in a situation where you don't come home at the end of a dig, right? Or that you are left with some kind of life-altering condition because you weren't doing safe work, or you weren't prepared to do the work safely, basically. And so that's a really important thing to take away when you're doing field work, when you're planning for field work, and we hope that we can maybe provide you with some resources for that.
That's right. And I think one other thing that we just wanted to emphasize in this paper is that when you go into a community and you're working in that community, you want to appreciate that they are in some sense looking out for you, right? You're using their, even at just sort of fundamental level, if we just reduce this to kind of a coarse economic calculation, you're taking advantage of their ambulance service and their hospital and so forth. So but I think most of us feel a kind of or want to feel a kind of connection, and are trying to be a part of those communities we work in, because we really value those connections, and we value the human aspect of that work. So we want to make sure that we are bringing resources to help situations that might present themselves in whatever community we work in. So that was
as opposed to burdening them with additional potential.
Exactly. I think that's part of it. And I think also just the recognition that it's a small way to make a little part of the world you work in a little bit safer. You sort of imagine it's this is like a very coarse comparison, but it's the equivalent of the automatic defibrillator in the mall,
Yeah, exactly. Or at the
why
ramp,
not have
right?
it in the truck? Yep, exactly. So
So
that was the point of the article. We'll get Nadine on to actually talk about it and explain what the drug does and some other safety things here at some point. But we'd appreciate it if you take a look, especially if you're going in the field, because we think it'd be worth looking into tossing in your first aid box.
Yeah, and congratulations, because this is Nadine's. Is this her first archaeology publication, or she had something in the main bulletin, didn't she?
No, she's had Nadine is published exclusively on addiction medicine, which I think is interesting. I believe her other paper was on. The listener will probably not look this up, but I think it was on managing pain in C-section patients when the mom is also using or is on a some sort of treatment to get off opiates.
But this would be her first archaeology publication. Is that correct?
Absolutely, yeah. No,
okay,
and we're just very proud to have Nadine be among the most published New Brunswick archaeologists now. It was
exactly.
It was a really crucial step that we thought was important.
Yeah. So that's great. Thank you for that. And I think that wraps up our hit pieces for this week.
I think it does. I think but we've had a lot, so we're not concerned about sometimes it's got to be one hit piece.
Exactly. And that's sometimes it only takes one.
Yeah. I keep thinking it's going to be like that Paul Revere and the Raiders song. And I always think it's hits keep getting harder to find. But it turns out that was actually just what was running through the head during my American Legion baseball career.
Oh.
So it was not, the hits were getting harder to find. I just in a bit of a slump. I don't know what it was. But it's Kicks, listener. That's the song.
It's Kicks, yeah. That's it, listener. I think we hope that you've had a chuckle, actually, and picked up some tips as it relates to pseudoarchaeology and engaging with folks that are taken in by pseudoarchaeology or programming that maybe not sort of the quality that and kind of content that you would hope to see archaeology being shared with, but we will probably be continuing to invite some experts on about this, and we want to continue to sort of push back on some of this stuff and find ways to engage with people and keep the conversations going.
Absolutely, and we really want to thank Darryl again for coming on, as well as Stephanie in the earlier program, and we sort of appreciate, or at least I appreciate, the sort of spirit of humility and openness with which they approach this topic.
Totally.
And I think of, just genuine, what can we do to improve this community and bring archaeology to anyone who would benefit from knowing more about it, which is
exactly
kind of the spirit of this podcast. And so it's really great to talk to folks who are better at doing that than we are and know ways to work on that.
Yeah.
So lots of thanks to both of them. They're very busy, and we appreciate them coming on.
Yeah. And so until next fortnight, listener, when we will be chatting with Bonnie Pitt-Blado about archaeologist collector relationships and all that fun stuff, and start our next 2-part series, have a great couple of weeks.
That's right, Ken. I think we're looking at a half-finished bottle of Courvoisier, and we won't see the listener. We'll this is probably still too long for YouTube by about an hour and a half. We'll talk to the listener in a fortnight. So have a good night, listener, and we appreciate being part of your commute, your flight, your marathon, whatever it takes.
Night, listener.